After 30 years away, I thought coming home would feel like a warm blanket, familiar, healing. The wraparound porch where I once watched fireflies dance in the summer heat still stood strong. The oak tree out front, the one Mom tied a tire swing to when I was 5, still reached for the sky. This was where I was raised. And after Mom's recent heart surgery, I came back to take care of her. It felt like the right thing to do. But within 24 hours, the neighborhood I once knew as peaceful turned cold. It started with a knock on the door, sharp and deliberate, not friendly. I opened it to find a woman with icy blonde highlights, a crisp blazer, and a clipboard clutched like a weapon. She didn't smile, not really, just a tight curve of the lips that never reached her eyes. "You must be Eleanor's son," she said, with a voice polished by authority. "I'm Diane Winters, president of the Meadow Springs Homeowners Association. We need to discuss some violations." Violations? I blinked. My mother had barely been home from the hospital a week. What could possibly be wrong? I stepped outside to keep from waking her and listened as Diane pointed to a list of infractions, somehow printed and highlighted in color. The rose garden was allegedly 8.5 inches over the property line. The mailbox was the wrong shade of terracotta, and the oak tree's lower branches hung too close to the sidewalk. "I'm sorry, my mother just had open-heart surgery," I said, trying to stay polite. "Can we have some time?" Diane clicked her pen 3 times before answering. "Rules exist for a reason. You have 7 days." Then she turned and walked away, like it was settled. I stood there stunned. 7 days to undo 30 years of memories, over colors and branches? Later that evening, our neighbor Frank Wilson came by with a casserole and a warning. "Watch yourself with Diane," he said quietly. "Last year, she bankrupted the Patels over a wheelchair ramp, said it didn't match the aesthetic." That night, as Mom slept upstairs, I sat in the kitchen, lit only by the glow of my laptop, and read everything I could find about HOA laws in our state. Page after page, regulation after regulation, and something didn't sit right. Some of these violations weren't even enforceable. Not without due process, not without legal notice. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became. This wasn't about roses or mailboxes. This was about control. And for the first time since I moved back, I felt like we were under siege in our own home. The morning after Diane's visit, I found myself out by the rose garden, measuring tape in hand. I hadn't slept much. My mind wouldn't stop spinning, not just over her threats, but what Frank Wilson had said the night before. If she could force a family to sell their home over a wheelchair ramp, what else was she capable of? I dug through old boxes in the attic until I found it. An official property survey dated 15 years ago, sealed in plastic and signed by the county assessor. Mom, ever organized, had filed it away with her house deed and warranties from the 90s. It was clear as day. The garden was well within the boundary lines. So when Diane showed up again, this time with a tall man in polished loafers, I was ready. "This is Gregory Palmer," she announced like she was introducing royalty. "Our HOA's legal counsel." Palmer offered a brief nod, but his eyes were already scanning the property. "We're documenting continued violations." I didn't flinch. I held up the survey. "This is the original county record. There is no encroachment." Palmer squinted at it like he'd never seen real paper before. "That survey is outdated," he said flatly. "We commissioned a new one last year." "Without notifying the homeowner?" I asked. "That's illegal in this state." I let the words hang there for a second. "I'm a civil engineer. I know how boundaries work." Diane's face tightened, just a flicker. But I saw it. Maybe surprise, maybe something else. Respect? No, not yet. But I'd rattled the script. Still, she didn't back down. Nevertheless, the other violations remain. So that afternoon, I did something that still makes me wince. I repainted the mailbox and trimmed the tree. Not because they were right, but because Mom didn't need the fight. Not while she was still healing. Not with her hands trembling each time a new envelope came in the mail. For a week, things were quiet. Too quiet. Then one morning I found a new notice taped to our door. Emergency HOA meeting. All homeowners required. No explanation. No agenda. Just bold red ink and a start time, 7 o'clock p.m. I arrived early, seating myself near the back of the community center. A few neighbors offered thin smiles. Most avoided eye contact. Diane stood at the podium like a commander before battle. Behind her sat Palmer and 2 other board members. "Due to recent challenges to HOA authority," she began, eyes locking onto mine, "the board is implementing stricter enforcement protocols. A compliance officer will begin daily inspections. Dues will increase by $75 per month. Gasps, whispers. A hand went up. Who's the officer? Palmer Security Consultants, she replied smoothly. I stood. Owned by your legal counsel, Gregory Palmer? Diane hesitated. The silence said more than words ever could. Isn't that a conflict of interest? I added. The room cracked open. Murmurs turned to outrage. Some shouted, others stood with me. Frank Wilson placed a hand on my shoulder. You've got guts, kid, he whispered. After the meeting, he introduced me to a woman named Sarah Jang, former HOA treasurer. Her voice low, she leaned in. They're after your mother's property. Corner lots are key to the commercial rezoning plan. I blinked. Rezoning? Not here, she said, looking around. Meet me tomorrow. Library, noon. That night, I didn't sleep. Something inside me had shifted. I wasn't just reacting anymore, I was investigating. And the more I learned, the darker this neighborhood became. I wasn't just protecting a rose garden, I was preparing for war. The library meeting with Sarah Jang shook me. She spread out maps and documents like puzzle pieces, each one pointing to something more sinister than HOA micromanagement. Our quiet neighborhood, Meadow Springs, wasn't just being kept in line, it was being prepared, rezoned, repackaged, sold. They're planning a shopping center, she whispered. Diane's husband runs the development firm. They need the corner lots to complete the entrance. Your mom's property? It's the last piece. I drove home with my thoughts in overdrive. Mom was asleep in her chair on the porch, hands folded, the blanket slipping from her lap. She looked peaceful, but the soil around her didn't. That dirt doesn't look right, she murmured later, peering toward her garden. It's darker, heavy. I leaned down to check it. That's when I noticed it. A thin wire, barely visible, strung along the property line like thread in a trap. My heart skipped. Don't move, I said softly, too calmly for how hard my pulse was pounding. Mom, stay right where you are. I called Officer Martinez immediately. While waiting, I photographed everything. The disturbed soil, the wire, the perfectly spaced holes dug just a day earlier by HOA-hired landscapers. They said it was for drainage improvement. And Officer Martinez arrived with backup, Sergeant Reynolds, a veteran who'd seen too many war zones to be easily rattled. But when he examined the wire, his face changed. That's not drainage, he muttered. That's military grade. Trigger wire. Call the bomb squad. Evacuate both neighboring homes. My mouth went dry. My legs went numb. It wasn't just a threat anymore. It was a crime scene. The next few hours blurred together. Sirens, flashing lights, men in bulky suits combing the lawn. They dug carefully, revealing metal discs, anti-personnel mines, buried along the perimeter of our property. Military grade, one technician confirmed. Illegal, lethal within 15 feet. I stared at the porch, horrified. Mom checked the mail every morning at sunrise. One wrong step. Who would do this? Why? Over 8 inches of garden space? But I knew the answer already. Detective Wren, sharp-eyed and composed, arrived that evening to take our statements. This wasn't an HOA gone too far, she said bluntly. This was attempted murder, and we're going to prove it. I showed her the photos, the documents. I told her about Sarah, about the black SUV that had followed us. Do you have security footage? I didn't, but Frank Wilson did. We drove across the street where Frank's security system, set up after his car had been keyed, captured everything. 2 nights earlier at 2:17 a.m., the cameras recorded 4 figures sneaking onto our property. Diane Winters, Gregory Palmer, 2 other men dressed in black carrying duffel bags. They worked in silence, methodically digging, planting, burying. Detective Wren paused the footage. That's our smoking gun. But it wasn't over. That night, I received a text from an unknown number. Back off, or next time we won't miss. I showed it to the officers. They traced the phone to a burner, bought in cash. Then another bombshell. Store footage showed Kyle Winters, Diane's son, buying the device. It got worse. When officers raided Palmer's business, they found a map detailing mine placements across multiple properties, all owned by residents who had refused to sell. This wasn't about violations. It was about intimidation, about corporate greed wrapped in community rules. 2 days later, Diane was arrested at home. She blamed Palmer. Palmer blamed the landscapers. But everyone kept dodging the bigger truth. We were up against an organized effort to force homeowners out, and they weren't stopping. That evening, I tried to rest, but every creak in the house felt like danger. I checked on Mom hourly. She tried to act strong, but I could see her hands tremble more than usual. "I never meant to put you in danger," she whispered. "You didn't," I said. "They did." What started as a disagreement over a mailbox had turned into an armed campaign to seize land through fear, and we were only beginning to understand just how far they were willing to go. The footage didn't lie. There they were, Diane Winters, Gregory Palmer, and two unknown men, caught on Frank Wilson's security system at 2:17 a.m., shoveling holes into our garden under cover of night. They moved with purpose. They knew what they were doing. They weren't planting flowers. They were planting landmines. Detective Wren leaned forward as the black and white video played again, her jaw tight, her pen frozen above her notebook. "This is deliberate," she said finally. "Methodical. And it confirms what the bomb squad found." My hands were shaking as I watched. Not with fear anymore, but with fury. "My mother checks the mail every morning at sunrise," I said quietly. "She could have died for this." And all over what? A rezoning deal? A few thousand square feet of land? No. It was about control, about money, about silencing those who didn't fall in line. By morning, the warrants had been issued. Officers raided the HOA office, then Palmer's legal firm. What they found turned our local nightmare into a statewide scandal. Maps, contracts, bribe records, a network of property takeovers connected to Apex Development, the company owned by Diane's husband. Buried in the files was a target list labeled Phase 1, with names of homeowners who had refused to sell. My mother's name was circled at the top in red. "You were first," Detective Wren said, "because you pushed back publicly. But you weren't the only one they were after." I nodded slowly, still numb. "This isn't just a case of HOA overreach anymore," she continued. "We're involving the FBI. This crosses state lines, involves black market weapons, and points toward organized crime." That evening I tried to sleep. I really did. But at 2:08 a.m., I woke to a strange scratching at the back door. I peered through the blinds and froze. Two figures crouched beside our air conditioning unit. One of them held what looked like wire cutters. The other had a small, blinking device. Police stationed outside responded instantly. Shouts, flashlights. The suspects bolted, leaving behind a canvas bag containing a timing mechanism and detailed blueprints of our HVAC system. "They weren't done," Officer Rodriguez told me. "They came back to finish the job." I stood in the kitchen, hands gripping the countertop. My mother was asleep down the hall, completely unaware of how close we'd come. Again. By sunrise, the story had broken. News vans lined the street. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in months came knocking, holding casseroles, tea, and trembling hands. "The Hendersons threatened to fine us over our Diwali lights," Mrs. Patel whispered. "And the next morning, someone slashed our tires." "The Johnsons were hit with $12,000 in sudden assessments," another neighbor said, all after questioning the HOA's bookkeeping. One by one, people started sharing. And as their stories emerged, so did the pattern. Anyone who challenged the board was financially punished, or worse. Later that day, Detective Wren returned with more news. "We found a storage room at Apex headquarters," she said, setting a manila envelope on my table. "Inside, files on homeowners in 3 different states, each one linked to land grabs, mysterious finds, break-ins, accidents." She pulled out one document, placing it in front of me. My mother's name, again, along with a payment record from Apex, $5 million offered to the HOA as a community enhancement grant if all corner properties were cleared. I closed my eyes, anger rising like a tide I couldn't stop. "All this," I whispered, "over a garden." Wren didn't smile. "Over water," she corrected. "Your lot sits on top of an untapped aquifer. The rezoning wasn't for a mall, it was for a bottling plant, worth millions in long-term contracts." That night, as my mother tended the few surviving flowers in her yard, her hands still trembling but her back straight, I knew we were past the point of fear. This wasn't about stepping carefully anymore, it was about standing firmly. And with every file, every photograph, every minute of grainy footage, we were turning the tide. The truth was no longer buried, it was out in the open. And for the first time, they were the ones who had something to fear. It didn't take long for the threats to escalate from anonymous texts to something far more personal. After the arrests, I thought we might finally breathe, that maybe justice was catching up. But it turns out cornered criminals don't surrender. They double down. The first message came the next night, a single sentence from a blocked number. "Back off, or next time, we won't miss." I showed it to Detective Wren, who traced it to a prepaid burner phone purchased in cash. Surveillance footage revealed Kyle Winters, Diane's son, at the counter. His face was bored, expression blank, like he was picking up toothpaste instead of delivering a death threat. Hours later, he tried to sneak into the police evidence locker with a remote detonator in his backpack. They were going to blow the remaining devices, Wren said grimly, if we hadn't caught him. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Meanwhile, Palmer's office revealed a deeper rot than we imagined. One of the duffel bags the landscapers left behind held a map, a property layout with colored dots indicating planned explosive placements. At least 6 homes were marked, all owned by residents who had refused to sell. They weren't trying to scare you, Wren said. They were planning a coordinated attack, quiet, deadly, and deniable. The reality was suffocating. We hadn't stumbled into a land dispute, we'd uncovered a conspiracy, and then came the second attempt on our lives. Around midnight, I heard a soft scratching at the back door. I peeked through the blinds and saw 2 shadows moving near our air conditioning unit, Kyle Henderson and the HOA landscaper, both crouched, tools in hand. I hit the panic button. Within seconds, police floodlights lit up the yard. Officers swarmed in, shouting commands. The 2 men ran, dropping a canvas bag as they fled. Inside, wire cutters, a blueprint of our house, and a timing device. They weren't bluffing anymore. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, trying to piece together what was left of our lives. My mother sat nearby, hands trembling worse than before. "I should have sold when they asked," she whispered. "I never wanted you in danger." "You didn't," I said. "They brought the danger. You brought the fight. But the more we fought, the higher the stakes became." That same day, we received an anonymous email with a video attachment. I nearly deleted it, then paused. Something felt different. The footage opened inside a luxury restaurant. Seated at a corner table were 3 men, Tom Henderson, James Mercer, CEO of Apex Development, and a third man I didn't recognize. "The old lady won't sell," Tom said. "Then try something illegal," Mercer replied coldly. "Our investors aren't patient." The man with the accent leaned forward. "My associates make problems disappear, but it'll cost you." And then, stepping into frame, Mrs. Henderson, calm, steady. "Do what needs to be done," she said. "Just make it look like an accident." My hands shook. I forwarded the video to Wren, who called back within minutes. "The third man," she said. "That's Vincent Caruso. FBI's been tracking him for years. Ties to organized crime, construction rackets, and black market weapons. This goes deeper than any of us thought." By nightfall, my mother and I were relocated to a secure hotel. Separate rooms, armed guards outside. I didn't sleep. Every creak, every elevator ding felt like a countdown. That's when the second message came. "You think arresting Henderson solves anything? Sell the property or prepare for 2 funerals." They weren't just targeting our land anymore. They were targeting our lives. The final straw came the next morning when Mom's doctor called with test results. Unprescribed sedatives in her system. Small doses, easy to miss, if you weren't looking for them. "She's being poisoned," he said. "Likely mixed into something routine, like her tea." I pressed record on my pen camera, called Agent Donovan from the FBI, and played back James Mercer's voice from the restaurant video. "Hospitals can be dangerous places. So many things can go wrong with medications." Donovan's voice turned cold. "That's enough. We're launching a multi-state raid. They don't get to hide behind business cards anymore." And as the sun set behind the hotel blinds, I sat on the floor with my mother's hand in mine, wondering how a rose garden, a fence, and a family's refusal to be bullied had unearthed one of the largest real estate fraud rings in state history. We were in the crosshairs now, but we weren't running. Not anymore. The message came in bold red letters. "Emergency HOA meeting, 7 p.m. mandatory." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Another meeting, another attempt to reassert control. But this time, I wasn't coming alone. I had a recording, I had documents, I had the FBI watching from the shadows, and more than anything else, I had nothing left to lose. The community center buzzed with nervous whispers as residents shuffled in. People glanced over their shoulders, spoke in hushed tones. A few nodded at me in solidarity, most avoided eye contact. At exactly 7 p.m., the door slammed shut. Mrs. Henderson took the podium, pearls glinting under the flickering fluorescent lights. Behind her sat Tom Henderson, Gregory Palmer, and 2 other board members, stone-faced. She cleared her throat with rehearsed grace. "As you've all heard," she began, Our community has recently been subject to a wave of troubling misinformation. I want to assure you that your HOA has always acted in the best interest of Pinecrest Gardens." I could feel my blood pressure rising, my fists clenched. She continued, "We've also discovered new discrepancies in property lines. Several corner lots, including Mrs. Wilson's and," she paused for effect, "Mrs. Davis's property, appear to encroach significantly onto HOA land. We are offering a special buyout program to avoid legal action." Gasps. That was it. That was the moment they tried to legalize theft. I stood up slowly. Is that what this is about? Stealing our homes and calling it a compromise? The room stilled. All eyes turned to me. "You planted landmines in my mother's garden," I said. "Military explosives. Not just to scare us, but to silence us." Mrs. Henderson's smile faltered, but she recovered quickly. "That's preposterous. We would never—" "We have it on video." Gasps turned to shouts. People rose to their feet. Voices overlapped. "Video? Is this true? Did you say landmines?" I held up the flash drive. "Frank Wilson's security system caught everything. Diane, Palmer, their team, digging at 2:17 a.m., placing military-grade devices just feet from where my mother gets her mail." Tom Henderson suddenly lunged from his chair, face purple with rage. "You should have left when you had the chance," but he never reached me. Detective Wren, dressed in plain clothes, intercepted him mid-stride, her badge flashing as uniformed officers flooded the room. "This meeting is adjourned," she announced, voice steady and sharp. "Jennifer Henderson, Thomas Henderson, Gregory Palmer, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, fraud, and multiple federal violations." Mrs. Henderson tried to gather her papers and retreat, but 2 agents blocked her path. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," she hissed at me as they cuffed her. "This isn't over." "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," I replied, "and it ends tonight." Outside, flashing lights lit up the street. News vans had already gathered. Reporters swarmed anyone exiting the building. Microphones were everywhere. But I only had one place to go. My mother. She stood on our porch, wrapped in her shawl, watching it all unfold. "They arrested her?" she asked softly. I nodded. "All of them." Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't just from relief. They were from exhaustion, from months of fear finally lifting. Across the street, Sarah Jang stood beside a detective, giving her statement. Neighbors began to gather, some in tears, some angry, many just stunned. "We should have spoken up sooner," Mrs. Patel whispered as she hugged me. "I'm so sorry." But it wasn't over. As we packed a few things that night, preparing to relocate for safety, I received another text. "You think arresting Henderson solves anything? Sell by Friday or bury your mother next week." I showed the message to Wren. She called in reinforcements. "Tonight, you move, and you'll have 2 armed officers posted wherever you go." By the time we arrived at the safe house, Mom was trembling with fatigue. I helped her into bed, made her tea, and sat by the window, watching the street below for shadows that didn't belong. I should have felt victorious. But justice doesn't come with parades. It comes in waves, of fear, of truth, of resolve. And in that moment, I realized we weren't just fighting for one home. We were fighting for every family that had ever been bullied, intimidated, or forced out by those hiding behind rules. And for the first time, we were finally being heard. I used to think the worst thing the HOA could do was fine you for a mailbox or demand you trim a bush. But after the arrests, as the dust settled and the headlines blared across the morning news, I began to understand. That was just the bait. The real beast had been hiding in plain sight. 2 days after the emergency HOA meeting ended in handcuffs, Agent Donovan from the FBI sat across from me in a quiet hotel room, her badge clipped to her belt, files spread across the table like a web of truths no one wanted to believe. She didn't waste time. "We've been watching Apex development for over a year," she said. "Your landmine case? That's the thread that finally unraveled everything." I swallowed hard. "So this goes beyond our neighborhood?" She nodded grimly. 5 neighborhoods, 3 states, every single one with a sudden surge in HOA enforcement, a spike in property violations, and a pattern of forced sales. Homeowners pushed out, land flipped, big money gained. I thought of Mom's garden, the tire swing, the casserole Frank brought over. They weren't just attacking a family, they were gutting communities. That afternoon, FBI agents raided Apex's headquarters. What they found stunned even the most seasoned investigators. A hidden room, walls lined with file boxes marked by neighborhood, Detailed records of fines, surveillance, photos of families, payment logs to HOA board members, and offshore transfers to shell companies in Belize and the Cayman Islands. One file was labeled Phase 2, Pinecrest Gardens. Inside was a typed memo. Remaining holdouts to be neutralized by Q3. Priority target, Elaine Davis property. Coordinates approved. Aquifer confirmed. Pressure until acquisition. They hadn't just wanted our land. They'd marked us like prey. Donovan laid out the next steps. 12 members of different HOAs had already been arrested. 5 Apex executives were in custody, including James Mercer, the CEO who casually ordered my mother's death over a wine glass. 3 judges, 6 police officers. Even District Attorney Walsh, a name I once trusted, had been led away in handcuffs after evidence surfaced showing her vacationing at an Apex-owned lake house. This, Donovan said, is organized crime under the cover of zoning. And my mother and I, we were just the ones who lived long enough and loud enough to expose it. That night, as we quietly returned home under federal protection, the neighborhood looked different. Not because the houses had changed, but because for the first time people stepped outside without fear. Frank Wilson was the first to greet us. "They're gone," he said, voice thick with emotion. "The whole board, resigned, replaced by emergency vote. We're starting over." Mom stood beside me, blinking back tears. She hadn't slept well in weeks, but something in her eyes had changed. Not just relief, resolve. The next morning, Sarah Jang came by with a lemon cake and a flash drive. "The FBI already has copies," she explained, "but I wanted you to know. I kept records too, before they forced me out. Fake invoices, phantom repairs. Henderson paid for a vacation home in Florida with HOA money. And there's more." Sarah's voice cracked. "They threatened my kids, said they'd slip under the water at the community pool if I didn't back off." I looked at her, this quiet woman who'd once managed the HOA's books, and realized how many people had suffered in silence. She wasn't just a whistleblower, she was a survivor. By week's end, federal charges were filed in 3 states. News anchors called it the largest real estate corruption scandal in the region's history. And it all started with one garden, one wire, one tired son trying to keep his mother safe. "I didn't know we had so many friends," Mom whispered one evening, as neighbors gathered for a spontaneous cookout on the street, children laughing, dogs barking, people talking freely for the first time in months. "You always did," I told her. "They were just waiting for someone to light the way." We weren't done yet, but we had broken the silence, and in its place, something stronger was growing. Not fear, community. Spring came quietly that year, not with celebration or parades, but with small signs of life returning to where fear had once lived. It started in my mother's garden, the same ground where landmines had been buried, carefully, maliciously, was now blooming again. Yellow tulips peeked out from the soil, followed by her beloved heirloom roses. We planted every flower together, shoulder to shoulder, hands in the dirt like nothing had changed, even though everything had. "I never thought I'd see this garden whole again," Mom whispered, brushing her fingers along a new bud. "But it's more than just flowers, isn't it?" "It always was," I said. "It's home." The community was healing too. 2 weeks after the federal arrests, the remaining residents gathered under the old oak tree in the park to vote, not just on a new board, but to dissolve the HOA altogether. In its place, we formed a small neighborhood council with term limits, open books, and something the old system never had: trust. Frank Wilson nominated Sarah Jang as treasurer. She tried to refuse, but the applause spoke louder than her hesitation. Someone else handed my mom a clipboard. "She's the only one we trust with the gardening committee," they said. She blushed, then smiled. That evening we hosted a block dinner. Tables lined the street, covered in potluck dishes and pitchers of lemonade. It wasn't fancy, but it felt free. Neighbors who once hid behind blinds now shared stories out loud. Stories of bullying, of fines, of years spent in fear of speaking up. But no more. They weren't just reclaiming land, they were reclaiming each other. And though the legal fight would stretch on, lawsuits, court dates, depositions, it didn't weigh on us the way it once did. The worst had already happened. We'd seen the ugliest part of power and survived it. And now we were building something real, something better. The press still called sometimes. So did other neighborhoods, places where something felt off with their HOA. They'd heard about what happened here, and they wanted help, not just with lawyers, but with courage. "Tell us what you did," they asked, "how you stood up." I never quite knew how to answer, because I hadn't planned on being brave. I just refused to let my mother be buried under someone else's greed. One morning, as we watered the garden together, Agent Donovan called with one final piece of news. "They ran a geological survey on your property," she said, her voice light with irony. "There's a deep aquifer beneath it, worth millions to the right developers." I laughed. "All this over water?" "All this," she confirmed. Mom chuckled beside me. "If they'd just asked nicely, I might have let them drill a well." We stood in silence for a while, the sun warming our faces. That night, lightning bugs flickered around the yard. Children ran barefoot across the grass, and my mother, cane in hand, walked along the fence line. No fear, no trembling, just quiet peace. A neighbor handed her a bouquet of fresh wildflowers and asked if they could plant some cuttings from her rose bush. She nodded, misty-eyed. "Of course. That's what gardens are for." We lost a lot, but what we gained was something rare. A neighborhood that no longer whispered, a community that stood tall together. And in the soft light of a home rebuilt, not just in soil but in spirit, I understood. Sometimes the fight isn't about winning, it's about protecting what matters, and showing others they can too.